The last week of training camp is underway for Ohio State, and there are 3 days of availability left, including one today, which is going to be Talkin' Tuesday.
Oh, boy.
For Bill Landis and me, Austin Ward. We've got safeties.
Mm-hmm.
We've got tight ends. We have the defensive line, and we have the offensive line ahead. Which one of those should we go in chronological order, or is one of those more interesting to you than the others? And I think I know the answer.
I mean, honestly, I think the most interesting of all those to me is tight end.
Oh, baby!
Which then allow us to go chronologically.
Let's go.
I don't know. So Tuesday's tight ends and safeties. I don't know if there's a ton on my mind as it relates to the safeties. I know Jim Knowles has now twice, I think, expressed concern about safety depth a little bit, but I guess I don't share those concerns. And it doesn't matter what I think, right? He's the guy who's coaching them, but so if he has them, they're real. But
right.
I find tight end pretty interesting. I still, that is the one position where I feel like I don't entirely know what it's going to look like this year, and how Keenan Bailey wants to approach that, whether that, and Ryan Day sort of, I guess, hinted at the idea of maybe this being a situation where week to week that changes depending on who's practicing well and who's not, and who's making a move and who's not. So maybe that'll be Keenan Bailey's answer as well, but we have not. I don't know that we've come. Maybe we have come close to establishing a pecking order at tight end. I think you can probably reasonably assume that it's G. Scott, Will Kazmarek, flip-flop them however you want, and then Jelani Thurman. But I would like to hear a little more about how that group is progressing, how Keenan Bailey sees it, what the methodology is going to be for who gets on the field this year, because it does feel a little nebulous at the moment.
If we are still living in this world where we believe Ryan Day is choosing his words very carefully, which I believe, very intentionally, which seems like is always the case, he did, I think, pretty strongly endorse Will Kazmarek as sort of the do-everything tight end, and that felt notable to me. Maybe that's off base. We'll find out from Keenan Bailey.
I felt the same way. Yeah.
Where that stands. That's pretty significant for Ohio State knew that he could become that, or they thought that he could based on the film. That's the reason that they offered him out of the transfer portal pretty quickly once he was in there in December of last year. But there were I think there were periods in March and April where Ohio State was looking at this and okay, you're going to have to work through this, get more used to the level of competition, and be ready to play. You're not going to have to play the number one defense in the country every week, but you are going to have to play some very good ones over the course of the year if Ohio State's going to reach its goals against Oregon, Penn State, Michigan into the college football playoff. So, and I did notice throughout March and April, Will Kazmarek was almost always one of the last people off the field in practice. From what I've seen in the opportunities we've had in August, that work ethic has continued. That's good for him. We know that G. Scott will show up and do the things that Ohio State wants him to do. The physical profiles of those two are not the same, and I think what Ohio State would ask them to do would not be the same either. So, piecing that together has been something we've talked about a ton, maybe too much, but I always get caught up and fascinated by the tight ends and the way that they're used in this offense, and it'll be great to get an update on that from Keenan Bailey. What that means for Jelani Thurman then is also something that we've just been hearing from Ryan Day a lot throughout this month, and the challenge for him to find that consistency and take the next step, because that is the one that could maybe change the picture more dramatically.
It definitely would. And so Doug asked Ryan Day a question last week when we talked to him about how he feels about their ability to play 12 personnel. And I actually wonder if they feel better about their ability to do that than they do their ability to play in 11 and have anyone other than Will Kazmarek do it, right? Which is maybe not a spot you want to be in. And I don't know that I've just never thought that G. Scott was really going to get to that point. I just think he's much more of a move him around kind of tight end. That's fine. Guys do that in the NFL, make quite a bit of money doing so. It's a good position to play if you can do it well.
Right.
But they need a second guy to sort of be the all-around tight end. And it seems like Jelani is probably their best bet to do that. Maybe it's Bennett Christian. I thought it was noteworthy that I think Ryan Day said last week as well that Bennett Christian had been practicing well of late, and it's got to be one of those two. And it's not going to be Max LeBlanc. He's got some time to figure that out. And DeMarion Witten is doing some receiver stuff. So I think you got to look at Jelani as the guy that really needs to take a step forward. I'm hopeful we can talk to him just sort of about what Ryan Day said, sort of about finding that consistency, sort of being the same guy day after day, snap after snap, probably is more to the point. they need it. Like I don't. It will drastically change, I think, what they want to do on offense if they don't have a second guy who they say, like, yeah, if we have to play 11 and Will Kacmarek decides he wants to go to the moon for the day, like, we have to put somebody else out there to play it. So I don't know that they're there yet. I'm eager to hear whether or not they think they're close to it or not.
That's really a great point, because when we've talked about the collective depth of that group and finding guys who could have strengths and have the ability to block, or that G. Scott can go out and be paired with Will Kacmarek and focus more on the receiving threat. Like, I think it'd be much easier for Ohio State to get to a point where they were comfortable. You could come up with any sort of combo. Will Kacmarek and Jelani Thurman, G. Scott, and maybe Jelani Thurman. Bennett Christian and Will Kacmarek, Bennett Christian and G. Scott. Patrick Gerd and Will Kacmarek. Like, I think you can come up with any combo of those two and be like, yep, that would work for what they need to do in 12. And 11 is where it gets like, oh, not quite so sure. That might be dependent on the responsibilities, and that's not the world that Ohio State wants to live in, because what was the reason that Cade Stover wound up playing a million snaps was because they thought that he could do all those things and never have to leave the field. So it's not even just that they need
body broke down,
and his body broke down, and it's not even just that they need Will Kacmarek or G. Scott or Jelani Thurman to do that. Like, they would like to live in a world where all of them could be trusted to go do things in 11, and that's probably where they're not at yet.
Yeah, and I mean, we're talking about blocking. We're talking about the ability to line up as an inline blocker and be reliable. So, I think Will can do that. He did it last year at Ohio University. He actually did it quite well if you compare some of the numbers. Jelani should have the build for it, and I think Bennett Christian does. So if you have three that you think can do it, I think that's pretty good. The second two there, I just don't know where they are. And Bennett is like in a weird spot too, because I didn't get to practice last year, but so he still got to develop, but doesn't really have any game reps to speak of, and did not get to play in any games at all last year. So maybe he's had to play catch up, I would imagine. Hopefully he's done that so they can shore up the depth. I think maybe they could be helped too a little bit by not always having a tight end on the field. And I think like they will have a tight end on the field probably 95% of the time, but I do think Chip Kelly is a little more willing to get into some zero or to, two backs is 20, right? So I think you could see some of that stuff too, just a little more creativity formationally that doesn't make you so reliant on making sure you have some good tight end depth, but it's still a major part of the offense. It will be out there predominant amount of the offensive snaps. So I feel okay like about Will Kacmarek. I think a lot of that is just based off words, right? We haven't seen it in an Ohio State uniform, but if you project, like I can see that. I just want to feel really good about like another one or two, and I don't know that I do just yet. But maybe Keenan Bailey can sway me on Tuesday.
Yeah, I don't think Keenan Bailey will express any concern about the depth. I mean, he'll certainly be challenging them to take the next step as starters and frontline guys, which that conversation is not going to be the same as what Matt Guerreri is having, and I don't think that. I bet that he's not that concerned about the depth either. But that will be a conversation that is more about where is Malik Hartford coming off of the shoulder injury?
Yeah,
has he caught back up to speed? And what Jalen McLean has done, which seems like is certainly catching attention.
Part of the reason I'm not concerned so much about the depth is because of how glowing Matt Guerreri was in the spring talking about Jalen McLean and Jaden Bonsu. And we've seen Jalen McLean especially show up in the practices that we've watched. So if you have him and you have Malik, we want more than four probably. Like you're getting a little greedy, I guess, at that point, but it's Ohio State. You're allowed to be. Malik is probably the most interesting one there because his 2023 season was kind of strange, and he is coming off of the injury. So you want to hear from Matt Guerreri, probably from Malik himself, that he's feeling like his normal self going into this season. But the top two are so good. And it's like, there's going to be a drop off for sure. Like if that's where the concern is coming from, I totally get that. But it's not like I don't think they're going to be bad at safety if they have to go into the depth. They're just not going to have, the best guy in the country and the sixth best guy in the country, whatever Lathan Ransom might be.
Yeah, and I don't need to really hear anything else about Lathan Ransom and Caleb Downs. I know what they're going to provide. Yeah. It is more interesting to see how those next two stack up. If Jaden Bonsu, who once we've sort of got into August in training camp, we've not talked about him a ton compared to the way we did in March and April, where he was getting like first string reps and doing seemingly a pretty good job in some of the scrimmages and situations that we saw. Like, I can't get that out of my mind where the coaches see way more, and they also are going to live in a world where they're concerned about everything at all times. That's their profession, that's their livelihood, and they're never going to be totally satisfied. But we also spent a lot of time over the summer being like, is this the spot where if something were to happen, for Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom, like, do they have the depth to survive? I feel like they have enough, and like not just guys that could get them by, like guys with big upside. Now they would be inexperienced. They would not be Caleb Downs. Right. They would not be Lathan Ransom, but they could be pretty close. And I don't know. That might be exaggerating as well, but I think they could be effective and certainly good enough for Ohio State to remain one of the best defenses in the country.
Yeah, I guess the one thing is that the inexperience could be exacerbated by what all Jim Knowles puts on the plate of that position, right? And I think we probably saw that a little bit in Knowles' first year, toward the end of the season, when there were some guys out there who hadn't played a ton and were still learning the defense, and it was like, oh, there's 5 big plays, right? So it's not an unfounded worry. I like the individual talent, I think, is kind of where I'm at, but I also don't want to undersell the difficulty of that position, especially in this scheme. Like you need to be on the field, you need to bank reps, and after the first 2, they don't really have any, because even Malik Harford, I think the majority of his experience last year came on special teams. I think he had that one start where he played one series and came off the field and never played again, and then this one snap against Michigan that I can recall. So he's like your most experienced backup and hasn't done a whole lot. And Keenan Nelson's there too. Like he's played some football as well, but he's obviously new to the scheme.
Mm-hmm.
We probably don't talk about him enough when we talk about safety depth.
That's true.
Probably should mention him more.
Yeah.
Because he's a little bit of an older guy at least. So throw him in there with the younger guys and Malik Harford. I guess Malik Harford's a young guy too. So it's Keenan Nelson, 2 sophomores and a true freshman. I can live with it. Maybe it's not ideal in terms of years on the job, but I think it's pretty good talent-wise.
The talent is pretty good for the starting defensive line. Probably pretty good for the backups too.
It seems like the young tackles, or I guess inexperienced tackles. Hiro Kanu's a young man, even though he's in his 3rd year. Tywone Malone's a young man, even though he's in his 3rd year, or 4th year, I guess, now for him. It feels like maybe, at least Jim Knowles, I guess we'll gauge it better from Larry Johnson, but Jim Knowles seems okay with how that's progressing with the guys behind Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. I would have expected that going into camp. There's just so much talent there that it'd be hard for me to fathom not having a guy or 2 stepping up. So I think they're okay. I think the guy on the defensive line who interests me the most is Mitchell Melton. Mm-hmm. We've talked about him a ton, so we don't need to belabor those points necessarily. But I just want to know if this is his time. Like if because it feels, I don't know. You can correct me if I'm wrong. It kind of feels like it is. Certainly, if it was ever going to be,
yeah,
it would be now.
You don't have more window,
right? I mean, but I actually think he does have 2 years of eligibility left. But just kind of crazy. He's been but you don't want to rely on that either, right? You want to see it happen now.
Well, and the thing would be, if his health doesn't allow him to do it now, the situation for Mitchell Melton becomes different. It is not Ohio State saying, do it now or you're never going to do it here. That's not. They'd be willing to wait, but as you've seen with other guys, Court Williams most recently, it's like, if your body doesn't allow you to do it at the way that you always thought you would, at what point do you have to face a different reality in a different situation? And clearly Mitchell Melton has come out on the other side where he is expecting to make plays. He's doing that in practice. He's doing that in scrimmage opportunities, and he's going to have reps and a workload for this team. What that is, if there are still any limitations, I don't know that you can truly find that out until you actually start going week to week and get into that grind of game practices, and go through the length of a year. That'll be the true test, because I think that's what, when there was some signs and some conversation last year, it's like, well, Mitchell Melton, in terms of pure pass rushing ability, he's the best on this team. Mm-hmm. Well, he may have been, but he wasn't able to go Saturday to Saturday and do that consistently over and over. His body wasn't ready for that. And certainly you hope that that's the case for him now, because he deserves it after having to spend 2+ years working back from pretty debilitating stuff.
It's kind of crazy that he's 2020 class, right? So this is his fifth year, and like he's finally just now in a position where he can even test that, right? Like it's been a really tough road for him. I think I talk about him so much because I want to see it, right? Like it would be a really good story, and I'm not talking about playing 40 snaps a game, right? But even if he plays 10 to 15, that is a significant uptick compared to what he's been able to do to this point in his career, and I think he can help them. So I want to know where he's at. I'm assuming we'll get to talk to him, and I want to know how Larry Johnson sees Mitchell Melton fitting into a rotation that feels like it's already pretty robust, right? Can you realistically play 5? Because like Hayden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson are going to play it. I don't know that whatever Mitchell Melton gets is going to come tremendously at the expense of those two other guys there behind Jack and JT. So how do you balance all that? It's a good problem to have if you feel like you have 5 you can play, but you still got to figure out how to play all 5.
Yeah, I wonder what that conversation on Wednesday night will be like, because we know that the starting group is entrenched. We know that the next wave in is very talented. There's not a lot of uncertainty about what the actual Rushman can do. Mm-hmm. The intrigue comes into the scheme as a whole.
Yep.
And what will Larry Johnson say about that? How will it differ from what Jim Knowles has described? They're playing the 5 or more things that Jim Knowles has mentioned is going to be part of that conversation. But so too is like, we have asked him before about what he believes about the Jack, and he has said, well, they're not in the defensive line room, so they're not part of the pass rush. That's an oversimplification, maybe. That's not a direct quote from what he said. That's the vibe that we've all left with for why Ohio State has approached their defense this way when we see potential for doing other things. Again, we're not coaches. Larry Johnson is one of the best defensive line coaches in the history of college football. Can't stress that enough. But what can he describe about that? Does he feel like he has been more adaptable to change in this offseason in this year than previous? It's never fun to have those conversations, just to be completely honest with you, because Larry Johnson doesn't enjoy them.
Clearly. Yeah. That'll be interesting. I'm assuming he will get asked about it, right? How he chooses to handle that. Because he has been, I don't know, like dismissive, I think, probably of the idea is the best way to put it in the past. And if he ever had a reason to be, this would probably be the strongest reason he would have with what he has coming back.
Oh, yeah,
on the defensive line, right?
Without question. And we've tried to, I've tried to make that point. They can go do that with 4 or adding a 5th, and it'll be maybe the best defense in the country, probably the best defense in the country. So be it. I'm not advocating for one thing over the other because I think that I just want to be right, or I just want to see C.J. Hicks play Jack. Like, whatever they choose, I think is going to work. It doesn't feel like what they've recruited the personnel to be, although they also weren't anticipating a world where they had JT and Jack for four years.
Right, yeah. So we'll see what Larry says. I don't want to beat that very dead horse too much more, because, like you said, it is sort of is what it is. It's an oddity, but it is also a reality, and I don't know that it's going to change necessarily.
But then the stage will be set for your day. Yeah. Thursday, prime time. Justin Fry and the Slobs.
The Slobs.
We're bringing it back.
It's a time slot that the O-line deserves. People are going to have a million recruiting questions for Justin Fry, which is like totally warranted. I don't know that I would want to ask any, because I'm.
He can't really answer them.
Yeah, well, one, he can't answer specifics, but he can ask him stuff like about approach and what's not clicking and those kind of things, and he can. There's a way to answer those without being specific, but it is also nice to have the out of, well, I can't talk about it.
Right.
So I'm curious how that'll go, but I'm probably going to be more focused on like this current team. Like, I'm fascinated by the Luke Montgomery move to center and what that means for him in the future. This talk about Austin Saraville playing tackle and reportedly looking kind of good doing it, and what that might mean for his future and this year too. Like, is he going to be a guy they want to try to get on the field, even if he is just to back up at guard? I have to figure out what's going on at right guard. Obviously, that's the most pressing question.
Yeah. Feels like it should be settled officially by then.
I think it might be. Although I don't know. We don't talk to Ryan Day this week, I guess. Right?
He's gonna do a lightning round on Thursday as well. Yeah.
Oh, so maybe we'll get that. Maybe we'll get that before we talk to the O-line. That'll be good. But yeah, I mean, if that's settled, then I think that the intrigue with the 5 is like gone, right? You just want to see or hear that all 5 have practiced together and are kind of building momentum toward the Akron game. But there's some pretty interesting stuff happening in the depth, and in a way that like I find encouraging for Ohio State. We can think about how pieces might have to move around beyond this year. I think I don't like silver linings, but I think it actually worked out quite well for them that guys like Austin Sareveld and Luke, when he's been out there, and even Zem Mohalski, like guys who are not necessarily going to be called upon this year, have had to play a lot in camp, and it sounds like they're making the most of it. So I want to know from Justin Fry, I guess, how he's feeling about the depth there, because it was definitely a concern coming into the season, but it feels like maybe some of those concerns are lessened now.
Well, Justin Fry has had the craziest August that you could really ask for. Mm-hmm. Aside from like the ongoing David Sanders and the recruitment stuff that we have talked about plenty coming out of the weekend, he's also leading a group that's had an illness that forced them to have meetings separated out there on the practice field. Guys in and out of the lineup. There's sort of a minor manageable situation with Donovan Jackson missing a practice or two to get him through the month. Like, he's had to scramble to get through practices. He's had to scramble to get through meetings. He's got the position intrigue there at right guard, or also back and forth with center. Those things seem to have kind of played themselves out for who's going to start when they get to the Akron game. But that is a tough month. That's not what you want your August to look like.
What did Urban say? It's life in the big city.
It's life in the big city, baby.
He is one of the more well compensated offensive line coaches in the country, and sometimes that's what your August looks like. Maybe not so much the sick thing.
The sick thing, yeah.
But the rest of it, yeah, you can get a little heavy.
It's easier to pass disease around in big cities.
I have heard that.
Yeah,
as well.
I think that's just a fact of life. It's a big city.
Yeah,
that's what's coming. The next starting tonight, Tuesday night, and through Wednesday and Thursday night. That'll complete all of the position groups talking during training camp. So looking forward to that, to wrap that up, and for training camp to be over, because that means that game week is coming soon.
Is camp officially over? Like the hotel portion's done, right?
Yeah.
Interviews are at night because class starts next week?
It's the weird part. Yeah, class starts. That's why the interviews shift to the evening. So I guess, I don't know what you call it right in between training camp and game week. Purgatory. That's what we're in right now. But we're going to it's not for us, because we have more content coming with those guys and getting to hear from the last few position groups. And so we'll have full coverage of that throughout the week as we build towards August 31st in Ohio State and Akron. Great to have that to talk about right here, to get set on a Talkin' Tuesday with Bill Landis. I am Austin Ward. We'll talk to you again later.